Shakespeare!
Welcome back to another episode of the Bard Rewound podcast, where we explore our analytical studies of Shakespearean literature. Richard II is the play of the day. Joining us is special guest Alan Bloom, author of his own critical reading, Shakespeare's Richard II, widening our perspective and understanding of the play. Today our discussion will revolve around the ideas that Richard II serves as a cautionary tale and the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of failed leadership. Richard's sinking dignity illustrates the perils of unchecked power through the deposition of his status as a monarch.
And further, his agony as he falls victim to disputes against his artificial position throughout the progression of the play.
The consequences of King Richard's inability to lead England effectively are encapsulated by the contrasting trajectory of Edward Bolingbroke's position across the play as he seeks political justice. Richard's downfall throughout the play is attributed to both human and godly punishment. The concept known as the divine right of kings refers to the idea of monarchical absolutism through a relation between the king's authority and God. Richard's character serves as an embodiment of the artificiality that is the divine right of kings. Richard's youthful innocence becomes corrupted by the artificial supremacy of the divine right of kings, following his ascension to monarchy at merely 10 years old. Richard's characteristics at the beginning of the play are the product of a man who only knows how to be God. Those of immaturity, incapability, selfishness, and a detachment from mankind. Richard's inability to lead is highlighted in Act 3, Scene 2, where Richard's proclamation to his kingdom ensures his confidence that God will protect him from Bolingbroke's threats. However, as readers, we see the dramatic irony in Richard's conviction while aware of the advantageous position of Bolingbroke. Upon Richard's realization, he delivers a soliloquy where he laments his despair and acceptance of the consequences of his failed leadership. He uses imagery to illustrate his mind's state. Let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the deaths of kings.
Richard had hoped in God's arms, the Welsh's arms and York's arms. He has no arms of his own, nor does he imagine trying to get them. Gaunt embodies the indoctrination of the divine right of kings' presence in England. In Act 1, Scene 2, Gaunt conveys that we must bear with the consequences of the king's decision, which are expressions of God's infinite goodness. Betraying King Richard cannot be done as we are merely humans. Since the king is God's deputy, only God can take vengeance.
This idea that only God can take vengeance foreshadows Richard's character progression following the structure of the Greek tragic cycle that involves the protagonist being punished by the gods. Shakespeare's use of this structure shows his criticism of the divine right of kings or authoritarian nature as Richard, who embodies the idea, faces ruin throughout the play. Shakespeare interprets the tragic cycle in the play through Richard's character following merely the final three stages of warning and punishment, Thonis, Ate, and Nemesis, while Richard's life prior to the events of the play illustrates the first two stages of prosperity and pride, hubris and olbos. Shakespeare's portrayal of Richard's undoing demonstrates his fear as a resident in England during the time of its effect, as well as serving as a cautionary tale to his Elizabethan audience, his fear of a divine monarchy. The tragic cycle involves punishment via the gods. This further enforces the idea that Shakespeare was against the divine right of kings, as Richard's false divine ruling faces true godly power. The play's political message attributes to its existence as an allegory. In Act 1, Scene 3, Richard shows his inadequacy to rule through his split decision to banish both Bolingbroke and Mowbray. This indecisiveness is further shown through the sentences each noble receives. The beloved Bolingbroke is merely sentenced to 6 frozen winters in an attempt to minimize resentment from commoners and his father, Gaunt. Mowbray, on the other hand, is sentenced to the hopeless word of never to return by Richard in hopes to disassociate himself, as historically Mowbray has been Richard's royal favourite. Richard's line, never to return, in reality speaks volumes about his characterization. Richard's decision to cancel the trial by combat is the key point where Richard questions God, specifically his vindication. This is the moment where Richard comes to the point of no return, not literally but figuratively, as he comes face to face with mortal pressure and the potential consequences of his immaturity as a leader. The consequences of Richard's failed leadership are embodied through his foil, Henry Bolingbroke. The emergence of his rebellion is the consequence of Richard's bellicose decision to seize the late Gaunt's possessions, thus depriving Bolingbroke. Bolingbroke's character motivation is driven by Richard's incapability to rule. His goal of dethroning Richard represents the human nature to rebel.
To me, Bolingbroke's motivation is self-serving, as he uses Richard's flawed leadership as an opportunity to attain kingship for himself and his own desired valiance. Bolingbroke's masculine motive is exemplified through the themes of the play Henry V, an eponym of his son. Toxic masculinity is a significant theme throughout the play that motivates characters' conflict and the plot. Either way, Bolingbroke's motivation to depose the king derives from Richard's failed leadership. Bolingbroke's character contrasts with Richard's through a multitude of ways throughout the play. Richard's reputation and artificial crown are diminishing before his very own eyes. Even when Richard in Act 2, Scene 1 is condemned by Gaunt for his wrongdoings, including his committal of the sin of Cain through his involvement in the murder of Duke of Gloucester, Richard surrounds himself by flatterers in an attempt to obscure reality and the consequences of his actions. Furthermore, he disrespects Gaunt's will by ignoring his advice against belligerents and using his death as a vessel to further pursue his unchecked ambition. Bolingbroke's status and dignity rise in juxtaposition with Richard's fall, as Bolingbroke leads the commoners in rebellion against Richard like a true ruler. Preceding Bolingbroke's accession to the throne in Act 4, the Bishop of Carlisle delivers a prophecy warning Bolingbroke that he is a mere human and does not have the right to overthrow Richard's divine sanction. Carlisle prophesies that Richard's deposition will cause England to become the field of Golgotha, alluding to Richard as the crucified Jesus and his land becoming a battlefield littered with death. Carlisle's prophecy acts as a parallel to Gaunt's warning in Act 2, Scene 1. Gaunt in relation to Richard's sin of Cain, and Carlisle in relation to Bolingbroke's sin of Adam. Both Richard and Bolingbroke show ignorance of these warnings and critical perspectives. This shows how the concept of absolute unchecked power forms hubris in the mind of kings. The contrast between Richard and Bolingbroke is clear-cut until the final act, when their individual tales join to tell a third tale, that of kingship in its divine claims and criminal foundations. In Act 5, Scene 5, once Bolingbroke has become king and Richard is imprisoned, both characters face the consequences of their sins. Richard has been stripped of his kingship as he remains entrapped in his lonely mortal mind. Richard delivers several soliloquies reflecting on his actions. "Had not an ear to hear my true time broke. I wasted time, and now doth time waste me." Richard confesses his shortcomings as king, as he uses the metaphor of time to say that since he lost his divine veil, his time has become invaluable, similar to how Cain's life as a farmer was lost. Later in the same scene, Exton, under false approval of Bolingbroke, murders Richard, completing his tragic cycle. Bolingbroke's responsibility for the murder, alongside unveiled conspirators against his life, leads to Bolingbroke beginning his career as a guilt-ridden, world-weary man, insecure and plotted against. In conclusion, Shakespeare's Richard II serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of failed leadership. The two key characters, Richard and Bolingbroke, illustrate the ideas of divine right, human ambition, and the consequences of flawed rulership through their contrasting existence as kings of England and positions in the story.